everybody. Hello and welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio. I am your host, Jess Dewell. Today, I have been waiting for this particular show today for a long time, and you will get introduced to Jimmy Adams in just a minute. Before we do, I want to talk about the title of the show. Smart People Learn Smart Money. I want to know what smart things you do with money, how you handle money, and how you overcome issues around money that you've had both in your personal life and your professional life. Eva is standing by. Scott is standing by. They're looking for your comments on social media during this live stream. You can use hashtag VBBRadio. That's hashtag VBBRadio for the Voice of Bold Business Radio, and we will work them into our show. It's really interesting how today we want to get more than we actually work to create and put out there. It reminds me of this time when there were alchemists and their whole goal was to make more gold out of things like lead or leftover broccoli or, who knows what else. That was the mission. How do we make something of value by putting energy into the making of it instead of actually making something that somebody else would want? And to talk to me about stuff like this and how those same things that 100 and 200 and mythologically people have been trying to do this through time, Jimmy's all about economics, and he's also an author, and I'm going to introduce you to him, and you will get to meet him right after this. So James Adam will be calling Jimmy today's show. Is the vice president of Mosaic Investment Company and the author of Waffle Street, one of the easiest, funnest reads about money you can pick up in a book. He analyzes and provides recommendations both for current and prospective client portfolios, and he has a mission and a passion of educating people like you and me to be financially literate. Now, his book, Waffle Street, is hilarious. I already mentioned that. And you may know it is also a movie that you can rent on Netflix. Be prepared to laugh at Jimmy's expense and really get an understanding for this concept of this first principle of economics. It's all about productivity, and there really is no such thing as a free lunch. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
All right. How are you doing today, Jimmy?
I'm fine. Thank you, Jess.
Good. I'm glad you're here. And like I said in the introduction, I have been waiting for this, because once I got my hands on the movie first, and then we talked, and then I picked up the book, not only did I laugh during the movie, and I felt really good just about life in general, because there's hope. There's hope for all of us. The book taught me a lot about economics that I didn't know. And I was surprised, having owned my own business for 14 years, having led other successful businesses and working with business owners on a regular basis. I was surprised at how much I didn't know. Tell me about this. How many people do you encounter that really have a good sense of money compared to the amount of people that you work with that think they get it, but are missing some big pieces?
Well, I think there's a couple ways to think about being financially savvy. You can be a very successful business person and not have a very good grasp of macroeconomics. And then you see a lot of people that are, Nobel laureates that are pretty well esteemed, I think, that in certain ways make pretty fundamental economic errors. I look at Paul Krugman, chief among them, reciting the broken window fallacy that has been sort of disproven for 150 plus years. So it's not that a certain amount of experience or academic pedigree means you're free of mistakes. So I think we all are, well, there are a number of people that are prudent in some areas and sort of wanting in others. You can find great economists that aren't great investors. So I don't know of anybody that sort of got every facet of finance mastered.
That's really interesting. And by the way, it's comforting because I will tell you, I prefer not to look at books at all. And some of it is because I like the big picture and the devil is really in the details. And in my own business and in my own home, I will tell you that I am in my business, I have deemed myself unable to pay my own bills. In my home, that privilege was handed off many, many years ago because of a mistake and an error I made when online banking first became available. Instead of paying our trash company $40, I paid them $400. And here I am, 21 years old. We don't have 400 extra dollars at 21 years old. And some days I don't have 400 extra dollars today. And so, regardless of where we are on our path, those little mistakes, the forgetting the dot between the 4 and the 0 and the other 0 and the 0, that was a big deal. And so that's just one aspect. And I'm like, okay, fine, I'm done. I don't want to have anything to do with money here. And so we have conversations about it. We make decisions. And I am part of the execution. However, I am not the instigator of the execution. And I do that on purpose in my business too. Maybe because there's a fear there now. I'm a little, even after all these years, I'm still a little shy about that. Are there other, shynesses and fears that you see around money when we're thinking about how to be as smart as we can with it that we need to overcome as people?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about like household budgeting, that sort of thing, I just discovered last week that, my wife is pretty much our chief financial officer, treasurer, and I'm kind of the chief investment officer. And a lot of times I think I have a general sense of what's going on, and I've been paying more attention. I decided to start paying more attention to the credit card lately. And I said, well, I thought you told me our regular monthly spending was X, and why is it X plus, 1 or 2,000 a couple months in a row, and, sort of what's going on. So, that led to a couple of awkward conversations, nothing that she was doing that was, sort of to be frowned upon, but just my own ignorance and kind of taking my eye off the ball. So I'm happy to delegate that to her some of the time or most of the time, but it's things like, well, why are we paying the insurance company that much? I didn't know that, So again, you're talking to somebody that spends his whole life, most of his life dealing with these financial issues, and I'm deficient. I think the most embarrassing thing for me was a couple months ago, we went to the bank to deposit a check or something, and I hadn't used the automatic tube or, the pneumatic tube there in 30 some years. And I'd never used one. I'd only seen my mother use it as a kid. I always walk into the branch. And so she was having me sort of assist her. And I was kind of nervous about, using the pneumatic tube. And she just thought that was the funniest thing in the world. I used to be responsible for a couple $1 billion of corporate bonds when I was at these life insurance companies, and like I need a remedial class in using the tube at the bank branch. So
well, okay, so some of it is what I'm taking away from both my story and yours. Hearing your story just now, that's funny about the bank tube, is that it comes down to experience. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know because we've just never had experience with it.
That's right. Yep.
And then another thing I took away from something that you said, like about the household budget, and we go through this too. You said you took your eye off the ball. There are times I take my eye off the ball, and it doesn't matter which budget I'm looking at. The fact that there are decisions that need to be made, sometimes that kind of, watching it and making sure everything's as it should be gets pushed down the list because it's not very loud. It's not a very loud voice that says, hey, check in and make sure that we like what we're paying for our different vendors. Check in and make sure that our that our costs and the choices that we have still support our family or our business, whichever it is. A lot of people take their eye off the ball or never even put their eye on the ball. And what would you say to those people? And because I know they're listening. Oh yeah, I just go to work and I know I have a CFO or an accountant and they just tell me what I have and I pay myself and it's all good. And then at home, well, my bank account isn't bouncing and I don't have and my credit card debt is basically under control. So I don't really need to think about it too much. What would you say to those people?
I think the thing I found that helps me is to just do it periodically. I think you don't have to obsess over it, but what's provided a certain discipline to us is just doing my income taxes. I could pay somebody else to do my income taxes, but that for me serves as a point of kind of regular review. And my wife and I will schedule, sort of planning meetings, and we'll talk about, kind of major outlays. So I think the biggest issue is just getting something on the calendar. I've read some data points on this where they talk about households that are able to, grow their net worth over time. And the biggest thing is just having semi-regular reviews. So it's not something you need to be doing all the time, but if you're talking about finances with your spouse I would say no less than every 6 months, that makes a huge difference. But you don't need to be doing it every week or even every month, but you need to be doing it at least semi-annually.
That makes sense. It also sounds a little bit more doable because whether, and this is interesting too, because personalities come out. There's this concept of, my issues with money are different than my husband's. My
That's right.
bookkeeper's issues with money are different than mine. My board of directors each of them has a different perspective than I do. And all of those things come into play then.
Yeah, that's correct. That's absolutely correct. One thing I see in my business, and I relate to my own, domestic situation, is, my wife likes to see a lot of money in the bank, and I'm more worried about the total balance sheet, right? Like what are we worth, and how much is it growing, and how much is it invested? But her first thing is how much cash do we have on hand, and for me that's like fifth or sixth on the list because I'm looking at all these other assets in a bigger context. So that's a good illustration of it.
Oh, yes. Yes. Okay. And let's think about that for a minute because what we look at and how we're looking at things can be very different. And all of us get attracted, even if it's just a rare occasion, to the mysteriousness, that sparkliness of, can I do this? Can I make money out of nothing? Have you experienced that in any of your roles with the clients that you work with? And how do you address that, the shiny object syndrome around making money where there really is none?
Well, I think it was funny. I was reading up on Isaac Newton the other day. There's a new biography of him out that I want to get. And even Isaac Newton, the father of, physics, basically, got caught up in alchemy. He apparently devoted a good bit of time to sort of chasing the philosopher's stone or whatever. And so I think it's a trap that we all fall into, no matter how sophisticated we are. I guess the biggest thing I'd say is that my job, really, one of my jobs professionally, is to make sure you try and maximize the client's return for the level of risk that they're comfortable taking. So it's a correct principle that you are supposed to pursue the most profit with the least amount of risk of loss, or I'd even argue energy to some degree. I mean, there's a natural sense of, and that's what productivity is, right? Why would I use a shovel if I can rent a backhoe to do the same job, right? So I don't think it's in human nature to make things harder for ourselves than it should be. So there is some correct principle there. The question is, when does that sort of get abused into really trying to get something for nothing? And frankly, the line maybe it can be a little bit gray. Are you getting something for nothing if you just buy into the stock market and just let the companies be managed for you, and you're going to get 9% on average over the course of your life if you do that. If you do nothing but just buy the stock market index and hold it, is that money for nothing? No, not really. There's risk there, right? There's market undulations. I think so it really is a semantic question of how you want to define getting something for nothing. And I guess I'd think of that as trying to get a lot of money without taking kind of any risks, or maybe putting your head in the sand about the risk that you're taking. There is no free lunch, right? So I think that's the allure, is when people try and pursue something with all kinds of upside, and they're either blind to the risks of the downside, or they try and shift those risks onto somebody else. And that's where you run into a lot of, moral hazard considerations, right? And I could talk at length about this, so I'll let you.
Yes, you can.
Jump in.
Yes, you can. Okay, so in the end, the mysteriousness, and how often we're attracted to that, comes down to, would you say it's pretty directly related to our tolerance for risk?
The mysteriousness of...
Let's see. I'm willing to take more of a chance, spend more time, try something different to get more for the least amount of work, if I'm more risk tolerant than somebody who is less risk tolerant.
Yeah, I mean, that's what makes people undertake entrepreneurial endeavors, right? Is or risk more money in the stock market as opposed to leaving it in the bank, or working for a startup as opposed to a government bureaucracy, right? So there is that. I think the part where it gets a little dodgy is when you're really trying to maintain all of the upside for yourself and shift all of the downside risk to a third party. It's when you don't have any skin in the game, as Nassim Taleb likes to say, that you run into sort of ethical issues, or government bailouts, or somebody ends up bailing out the hapless person that's left holding the bag but was never going to get any of the upside to begin with. So
well, and we all have to have different experiences with money, and this is really interesting too, because within an organization, this could be your house, your household. It could also be a business where we're talking about embezzlement of sorts, where somebody comes in and they're taking money and you don't know, or they take all the money and they run, which I don't know if that's called embezzlement, but I don't know the word for that. That's actually happened to me. Somebody came in, took all the money from our business that we had, and disappeared. And I was like, what? So, and it was because I put my head in the sand in the wrong way. I was risk adverse to having conversations that were hard to make sure we were on the same page about things. And I totally missed the signs that there was a danger to the business. And I think that's something that, when we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know we're avoiding, do you have a suggestion for us to be able to say, hey, here's where this relies on my integrity, if you will, and here are the things that I need to be searching for, or the questions I need to make sure I'm asking to make sure I know enough to know if there's a problem?
Yeah, I guess I'd say the biggest thing is having the red flag of, if something sounds too good to be true, it always is. Meaning, when you're promised or told you have all of this upside and it's not going to cost you very much, or you're not really risking very much, I know that 99 times out of 100 there's a problem. And I'll give you a good example. Is some of these annuity products. We have clients come in. We don't sell annuities or deal with them, but there's a lot of things out there that promise people, oh, you can get most of the upside of the stock market, and you're going to get 1% every year. That's the worst that can happen. And you're like, oh wow, where do I sign? Well, I used to work at these insurance companies. There's no pot of magic beans that they have, right? So they do all kinds of complex things with derivatives to protect your downside, and then they pay these salesmen good commissions to sell these products. And what you end up seeing is these people that were told that they were going to have all this upside in the market with no downside, never do as well as the market when it's rallying. And the costs of that downside protection get to be pretty, prohibitive. So, there's no free lunch, right? If you bought shares of Tesla and it went to the moon, there was also a pretty good chance that you were going to lose all your money, which the company's still bleeding cash, right? So, particularly, I think, in the last 20 or 30 years, and I've seen it over the course of my career, information has become so proliferated and these computers so powerful that markets have just generally become a lot more efficient. So when anybody's telling you that, there's this pot of gold that they see that nobody else does, I get very wary of those claims, because there's a lot of smart people and a lot of computing power looking at all this stuff. And there aren't kind of the efficiencies to be exploited that there were 20 or 30 years ago. So that's why these hedge funds aren't making the money they used to. That's why Warren Buffett doesn't beat the market the way he used to. So, yeah, I mean, if anybody's promising you the world and saying it's not going to cost very much, you have to risk very much, I can tell you they're selling you a bill of goods.
Very good. Okay. Hey, and we have a question that I'd like to bring in from our live stream. It says, watching VBB Radio Live with at Waffle Street, that's Jimmy, and me, Jess Dewell. It's a great convo. Here's a question. In relation to small business, what are the biggest opportunities that we can look for just within our own businesses to become more efficient?
Well, I mean, that's going to depend business to business. I mean, it might be that you don't have a very efficient means of financing yourself in terms of who you've got as investors, or your banking arrangements. I mean, it could be something on the financial side. It could be something from Google Analytics, like web searches. That's something that I'm planning on working on in the next couple of months. Are people that should be my customers not converting into sales because of how my website's set up, or how I'm structured for hit results whenever they do a query. It could be a matter of insufficient IT. I mean it's it's an endless list, right?
Okay, so if we were to
you might have software problems.
Yes. So first is identifying the problems we have, which would be then what do we not like that is going on in our business right now? Maybe it's a feeling that we need to verify. Maybe it's a change in return. Maybe it's a slowdown of a funnel. Maybe it's a specific turnover in a department or role within the organization. Would those be good places to go? I don't like these. And now, because I know I don't like them, there's something not happening that I want to be happening as leading this thing, this organization. We've got to start there and start looking for efficiency there.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes it makes sense to even, bring in a consultant if there's somebody you trust. I mean, we're going to do and our firm's doing real well, but we're probably going to do a bit of a survey with clients just to help us in our reporting efficiency. What are we doing that you like? What are we doing that you don't like? And I've been told that it helps if you get a third party to speak directly to your customers in some cases, because they'll be more transparent with them than they would be with you. So it may be just a matter of something as simple as having somebody else talk to your customers and then giving you their feedback.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. And I like that you bring up consultants, because I know you guys do that, right? Your organization does that. Red Direction does that. And we do it in very different realms of how we could help businesses. And so I love that you bring it up, because that's often overlooked. We think we can learn everything we need to know, not pay the money, so save some money, and then be able to get the change that we want. And I'm going to go back to we don't know what we don't know. And until somebody can tell us some of the things we don't know, we don't really realize what the opportunity could be.
Yeah, and it's also a matter of getting new, I think, blood in the organization from outside, so I've seen that with companies, a couple of months after a new hire starts, the CEO would come in and ask them, what are you seeing? What should we be doing differently? What's your perspective on this? Because you can get sort of caught up in your own way of doing things, and you need to get out and get some fresh perspectives on it. Industry conferences is another one where I didn't realize, kind of what software was out there that could help us in our business till I got to some of these conferences. So that's helped me a lot too.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay. So continuing to learn is a big deal. Ladies and
Yeah, it's the
gentlemen, you
biggest
are
thing.
listening to the Voice of Bold Business Radio, where I am speaking with Jimmy Adams, the author of Waffle Street. And, you know, we're talking about all things money, and the things that we're talking about apply to our homes. They apply to ourselves and how we deal with money. They apply to our businesses, and they're all being woven into in and out of each other as we talk about this. And it's based off of conversations that you are also having. And Jimmy, we had another question come in from the live stream, and here it is. As a parent of an 18-year-old, what's the very best financial advice I can give my son? I know, right? Where to
Oh,
start?
wow.
Where to start?
It depends on the kid, right? Because, maybe, it could be a matter of learn how to budget. It could be a matter of, learning how to invest. It could be a matter of, teaching them the value of hard work. I don't, it's too idiosyncratic. It depends on the kid. There are some people that work really hard, but they don't know how to save. There are some people that save, but they're not willing to take the risks of investing, and that really hurts them. There are some people that invest too aggressively, and they can get away with it for a while, but eventually it'll catch up with them. So it's hard to give one sentence response. I mean, I look at my job as an investment advisor as being kind of a physician. And it's sort of like, well, you asked me, what's the single best thing I could do for my health? Well, you might be exercising really well, but your diet might be terrible, or vice versa, right? So it really does depend on the person. And I guess that's what I'd say is that it does help to talk to somebody that, kind of does this stuff professionally, and just to get a general sense of what your strengths and weaknesses are, because everybody's are different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And what I hear you saying is there's some level or awareness of financial literacy. And as a parent,
Yes. Yes.
we
Yes.
can take a look and just look at what is the financial literacy of our child, and then help them from that point so that they are working from a strength and confidence instead of always being part of the school of hard knocks.
That's I could not have said it any better myself. And it's interesting. I look at my own situation. My dad was a pretty successful businessman. He'd done a lot in logistics, and then the real estate relating to that. He's really averse to the stock market. He just has this attitude about it that I would rather own my own building than give money to another company to sort of invest in them. And it's worked out pretty well for him. But I wish somebody had taught me a little bit more about stocks growing up. And my money growing up was always in a savings account until I got to be 18, when I started buying stocks on my own. So I'm glad that better late than never, certainly. But I think there are a lot of situations where the financial literacy is it's just not there. I mean, look at Warren Buffett. His father was a stockbroker. Do you think that had any effect on what he did with the rest of his life? Or Donald Trump, his father was a real estate developer. I mean, these guys, they get started so young that they have this massive advantage over everybody else, because the financial literacy has been taught to them from the time they're in middle school.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. My parents are similar to your father, where it was all about saving. It was all about saving, and you save, and then you spend what you saved, and you never spend more than what you saved, and you save more than what you spend. And so it's interesting to hear you say that, because it was when I was a young adult and had this concept of stock options after I sold my first company. What is a stock option? What does that mean? Oh, there are a lot of people with stocks. Oh, that's what this thing called, whatever it was. And back then, ETFs were brand new, but that's where Vanguard or your 401k or these other things kind of start coming into play as well. And it was a really cool journey. And I was led there by curiosity and an understanding of wanting to do more than just save money. Because when we can save money, we know we're doing something right. However, being able to leverage that money is also really important. Now, is that a good tie-in to bring in Say's law and this concept of where production occurs that creates demand?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'd say is, with Waffle Street and kind of my focus on the book, it's really wanting to explain to people about how the whole system works and how it fits together. Because to be honest with you, there really was not a good primer on thinking about how the whole system actually fits together with money and banking and government and economics and the Federal Reserve. You get pieces of it in these various books, but you don't get a comprehensive view. So I think my book is very good at addressing those issues. It is not here's a guide to, budgeting, saving, and investing. So there are a number of very good, books out there that deal with that. Mine is more about trying to understand how the whole kind of system works and fits together, and why did it break in 2008, and going back historically, what caused it, to break in the 30s with the Great Depression, and then these crises in the 19th century, and what's sort of looming on the horizon as collectively, our federal debt and unfunded entitlements kind of spiral out of control. So that's a long answer to your question. I apologize if it's a little discursive, but I'm sorry. Does that help, or
it does?
Should
and
we pursue another vein?
You can't see it. However, I'm holding up the book, Waffle Street. And not only am I holding up the book, I'm going to show the side and the notes that I have written on the inside. I mean, like every 3 or 4 pages, I have things written in the margins of where we're at, where we're going, things I didn't know. And you're right. I don't want to be taught how to budget, but I do want to have a better understanding of economics. I took economics classes, but that doesn't mean I understand what that means in the real world, and the play and the psychology and what's actually going on and the manipulation that can occur by getting around laws here and there. All of those things played in. And I actually really think, productivity and production is a pretty big part of it. If we're saying even Isaac Newton is attracted to this concept of alchemy, as we all are, and getting the most for the least amount of work, as we all are. That's how we make profit to reinvest and do some of these other things. What do you think Say got right in his law? Because I know you actually talk about it a lot throughout your book.
Well, the reason I talk about it is because it's the most important principle of economics, and it's the most neglected. So I think Robert Heinlein, the science fiction writer, is the one that coined "there ain't no such thing as a free lunch," right? It's in one of his books, and that's the basis of kind of Say's law, which says a product is no sooner created than from that instant it affords a market for other products to the full extent of its value. Now, that's a long-winded way of saying, if you want to buy something, you have to create something of value for somebody else, right? And that thing of value that you create can then be traded for that thing of value that somebody else created. And that's all an economy is this exchange of productions. So the problem is that 80 years ago, we got caught up in this idea that the real problem of economics and recessions is there's not enough demand. People aren't spending enough money, they're saving too much money, yada, yada, yada. And that was born in an era when the problem was that banks were collapsing all the time. And you're going to hoard more money if the banks are collapsing, and money is going to become more valuable. It'll buy you more stuff if other banks keep collapsing. So you really have to consider the context in which those theories were born. And at the end of the day, if the banking system is stable, then the main thing that you can do to increase everybody's standard of living is to make them more productive. And that means, historically meant that you invested in more equipment, and you trained your workers to use this equipment, And as the company made more money, the companies would have to compete for more their laborers. They'd have to pay more money, and so the business owners made more money, the laborers made more money, and everybody was kind of happy. And what's happened is over the last 30 years, a couple things have happened. One is you have more integration in global markets, particularly with China. They didn't really pursue a capitalist approach. They weren't very efficient. You have a number of countries that were previously third world becoming a lot more efficient. Vietnam, another great example. And so when that happened, you have more kind of global competition across products. But with the advent of the internet, you also have kind of this global information transparency, meaning, I might be competing for somebody in the service I provide as a research analyst in New York with somebody in Mumbai, where the wages might be 40% of what they are in Manhattan, right? So you have that going on, but you also have technology creating a situation where the rewards that would have gone and then been spread out over a larger number of firms and people at those firms go to an increasingly small number of firms, not just within the United States, but around the world, right? Facebook's in every country, right? So what that means is that the benefits of these increases in technology are increasingly skewed to a smaller number of people. And it means that these industry life cycles get really compressed, meaning you can go from an industry that's very nascent and inefficient to where a lot of business owners can make money to a situation where it gets really efficient and you're only left with 2 or 3 firms. That used to take, decades. And now it takes just a handful of years, right? So the problem is it's very hard for somebody to say, I'm going to do this to add value for other people, and I'm going to get these degrees, and I'm going to set up my shop, and I'm going to make a good living doing this. That business plan that could have been viable for 20 years back in the 80s now is viable for 36 or 48 months. So it's hard not to get flat-footed, and you got to be really nimble, and then there's a lot of attendant social fallout with that. So I think that's a huge problem in the 21st century. I've been in that situation myself, 2 or 3 times with the insurance industry and how much that's consolidated with the money management industry, particularly at the institutional level. So this rapid pace of change has gotten to the point where it's destabilized a lot of people's livelihoods and consequently their social situations. People are reticent to get married, to start families, because things change so fast. So it's a huge problem, in terms of how do I keep my skill set up? How do I, relocate to where the jobs are going to be? How do I make sure I'm in the right place in the right industry, because things change so fast? And then you're trying to manage, a marriage and children on top of it, and you start to understand why people are so, there's this social angst that you read about or is manifest in all these different ways. So the problem I really wanted to consider in the book was that historically, when things got ugly economically, what you did was you just cut taxes or you increased government spending, and through some combination of these things, people would, spend more money, and you'd hope that business would invest in new equipment that would make their employees more productive, again, raising the wages. Well, now the problem is getting workers that have the right skill sets, which keep changing so much, right, in the right place where they might not currently live. So the whole takeaway of Say's law is that you can't just create these long-term solutions to economic problems just by playing these little games with government changing the level of taxation or the level of spending. You have to be, as a worker, somebody who is very nimble and willing to relocate, learn new skills, or enter a whole new industry. And that was kind of the takeaway of the book. I hope that it was that it's all on you. And despite our best efforts, you're still going to get caught up in the winds of chance. So again, long sort of lecture. I'll step down off my soapbox, but
this is where we
think
want
once you really understand. Well, my thought is where you really understand that paradigm, you start to understand a lot more social issues and political problems. You start to understand the thought of, coal miners in West Virginia in the election of 2016. You start to understand why we have this opioid epidemic, right? I can't just get out of high school and work at the factory for 20 to 30 years and be able to provide a stable income for my family that I want to start. And you see why people are delaying marriage and childbirth. So there's so many social and political knock-on effects of these technologically driven changes to the economy, right? You see these concentrations of wealth that we haven't seen, since, Rockefeller and Vanderbilt, and right. You understand the political malaise. So I think it is important to understand the economics to really understand some of these other, sociological and political phenomena. And kind of my takeaway from the book was the thing that really got me asking these questions is why is it that with the government just cutting interest rates and cutting taxes and investing all this money in 2009, why is it that we're still kind of in this malaise for years and years, and you still have a huge part of the workforce that's not engaged to the degree that it was 10 years ago, even though the unemployment rate's gone down. So you have to understand that these changes are structural, and there really is no magic wand that can be waved by government, and it falls to each of us. The other thing go ahead.
I was like, that's really interesting because there's a whole bunch of stuff that keeps coming up when you say this. The first is, okay, we can't rely on other people's knowledge because other people's knowledge is already outdated. We can use their knowledge to figure out what we want to think about next for our specific situation and what we want at our home, for our families, for ourselves, for our businesses, as a team member, as an employee, as a citizen.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to. I mean,
yeah, that's cool. Okay, I was like,
the world.
Yeah, and that's really important to take away. And so anytime we're not engaged, whether that's at work, whether that's we're leaving because we decide we can do this on our own for more money, whether that's, whatever that is, there are things. Even I was having this conversation last night with my husband, Ryan. I said something because I was thinking about our show today. And one of the things, it was interesting because I said, there are people who go out and they work on their own and they want to, in essence, make something for nothing. They want to make more than the wage that they were earning, doing the exact same thing in the exact same way. Even though they have more overhead, they have more responsibilities, they have a different way to think about it, they have to go find clients or other things that were outside of the role that they did for the wage that they earned as part of a larger organization. Now, I love that. I love the concept of going out, starting a business, deciding to make the world a better place when we do it for more than the good of ourselves. Because at which point in time we're only doing it for ourselves, we end up trading dollars for time. It doesn't matter if it's in somebody else's organization or in our own, we trap ourselves. And that's another thing that I was taking away about this concept of what is our willingness? How much are we thinking? Are we questioning our own assumptions? Where is our financial literacy? And are we working from an ego? Are we working from an entitlement? Or are we working from, I know I have something more to give that I can't in the way that I've been giving it so far? What's your response to that?
Well, I think, there are all different kinds of motivations for entrepreneurialism, right? I guess the biggest thing I'd say, from what I've read in my own experience, is you really have to enjoy the process. You can't just think about the paycheck or, the kind of the money down the road, because that won't sustain you. And it's also kind of a ridiculous approach to life, right? I mean, you have to enjoy what it is that you're doing, because even if you end up with more money, the utility for money actually drops off pretty quick, or I should say it flattens out for most people. And again, the numbers are dated, but you get around $75,000, $80,000 a year. In most parts of the country, you can live, reasonably comfortably. It doesn't mean you wouldn't like a nicer car or a bigger house, but the point is, what the difference between making $500,000 a year and $1 million a year psychologically is negligible. That's an ego thing, right? So
Yes.
in terms of, you know, your standard of living and how well you're going to eat, it doesn't matter. So what should matter, and what really, money's a temporary motivator. What really enables you to do something long term for long hours is just enjoying the process of creating whatever that good or service is. And I think I've learned that lesson going through you know, the restaurant experience and the book writing experience and the movie production experience, is that, you know, regardless of the economics of it, you know, I really enjoyed the process. I'm proud that I did it. And that's the biggest thing. I mean, the money is just kind of the icing on the cake when it comes. I mean, you know, and it's come in different quantities and different endeavors. And I'm always sort of, but I wouldn't trade anything that I've done, you know, for the sake of the money, because I needed to do this sort of psychologically, and I enjoy the creation of it. We had you know, just the way people have responded to the movie. I mean, I had a kid tweet the other day, "It's the most inspiring movie I've seen." And, you know, you get emails from people on LinkedIn or LinkedIn messages of, "It's inspired me to move to a new city." You know, you can't really sort of put a price on that kind of thing, right? It's pretty incredible.
It is.
But that's not why I did it even. It's a fun sort of effect of it after the fact, but it was something I needed to do because I needed to do it.
Right. Yes, exactly. It was part of your learning process, and the way that you chose to share it, other people are now being lifted up because of it. So even though it might not be quantifiable productivity that turns into a balance sheet at the end of the day, it's a quantifiable, from the feedback you're receiving, improvement of human life overall, one person at a time.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that it's funny. If you get into economics, they talk about, you know, maximizing utility. I mean, it's pretty irrational for Warren Buffett to give away most of his money if your goal is to just get richer, right?
Yeah.
But that's not why he's doing it. He's doing it because he likes allocating capital, but he's basically said, look, you know, now I can make the world a better place. And you know, that's where he derives the satisfaction from. And so I'd say that's an important lesson too, is if you look at the life of Rockefeller, you know, from his first paycheck, he was giving money away. He didn't wait till he was already affluent to give his money away. He was paying, you know, tithes and doing a number of pro bono things, you know, when he was still a young man. So I think there is a lesson there, is that if you let your sense of self-worth or self-definition get caught up in, you know, how much money you're making or how much you're worth, you're in for a pretty sorry life. And I'm kind of amazed and impressed by, you know, these people that are really affluent that still end up, you know, they see money as kind of a means to a greater social end as opposed to just a personal measuring rod. And I think there's a good lesson there.
Yes, and this actually ties into a question that we received from our live stream, and that is, how do you view the future, and what will be the keys for success going forward? And let's talk specifically around what we've been talking around economics.
Well, I mean, are we talking kind of personally or as a country or what?
You know what, that was
in terms of what,
it was left open. So I would say pick the one that resonates the most, and that's the answer we will use.
I think you know, if I could speak about the country in general, I think there does have to be this realization that, you know, people are always going to vote for politicians on the basis of, you know, having my dreams fulfilled. And, you know, what he says in Napoleon Dynamite, vote for Pedro and your wildest dreams will come true. You know, that sort of thing. Vote for me and your wildest dreams will come true. I think we just have to realize there has never been a greater need to be proactive in our learning and our careers in the history of this country. And nobody is going to take care of you. I don't care what they say, what office they're running for, what they think they have to offer. You are going to be the only person that ensures that you have a bright future. You, and I'll say God, I'm kind of a religious guy, because there is a lot of randomness and fate, and a lot of it, as smart as you might be, as much as you might read, and as hard as you might work, a lot of it just comes down to being in the right place at the right time. And I think it's imperative that everybody acknowledge that.
Yes, I think that is amazing. And we're going to pivot just a little bit because I know you keep mentioning the movie, and that's actually what brought you to my radar. And the reason I watched the movie, I think I shared with you when we've talked in the past, is that I'm on Netflix. I don't even remember why I was watching movies because I don't get to do that very often. And all of a sudden there's this big featured thing that says Netflix original Waffle Street, and it has Danny Glover right there. Now he is one of my all-time favorite actors. There's a personal story behind that because my husband, in a dream I had, my husband was in trouble and Danny Glover was the one who saved my husband. Now, this was, of course, this was after Lethal Weapon, but before Waffle Street. So somewhere in there, I had this weird dream, and Danny Glover was the savior of my husband. And so I'll watch any Danny Glover movie I can get. And I knew nothing about you or your book. And here I am watching this, and the actor that portrays you, right? James Lafferty. I don't know if you thought he did a good job or not. He made you so relatable and so willing to learn and so curious and so there's another one I'm looking for, accepting of what was needed to learn to move forward, that it was an amazing role for you. And then, now you've got Danny Glover, and of course the actual man's name he portrays is eluding me because I've got Danny Glover.
Edward. Yeah.
Thank
Edward,
you. Yes,
yeah.
Edward. I've got Danny Glover lights everywhere in my head. Edward, he's also an incredibly instrumental character in your learning and curiosity and just watching of the world. And so what was the neatest experience working with these actors and taking the thoughts and the experiences you had from this book and making it into a movie also?
Well, it's kind of funny because Danny works his tail off. I mean, he's a very busy actor. He does big budget things. He does smaller budget things. He does theater. He just likes to work, and he's a workhorse. So I think that was kind of a big lesson. Very down to earth guy, very nice guy. And I'll tell you, acting's a tough business. It's feast or famine. You really got to have, I don't want to say nerves of steel, but you really got to have fortitude, I think, to make it in show business. And I think you see that's why some of these folks have the problems they do when the career goes through a downturn. And it was funny talking to James. James had done One Tree Hill for so long and hadn't really done many movies or other projects for the 10 years he was doing that. I think he actually could relate to the character pretty well because he had done a show that was on NBC for a while, but this was his first role in a feature film, and he's in every scene except one. So he saw it as kind of an opportunity to, expand himself, to see if he could carry a movie as a leading man, which I think he did very well. But also trying to figure out, who he was as an actor, having gotten into this rhythm for the last 10 years. Am I going to be a movie actor? And so I think he kind of naturally related to the character.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that neat? So some of the same traits that came across from you in your book, Waffle Street, allowed him to bring his own personal experience and be able to, and you said the word relate, identify with them to some degree. And so he was able to do the same and really bring out the more hilarious parts of the book, Waffle Street, to the movie Waffle Street, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the consensus was, he did a pretty good job. I will say that we think that we spent a lot of time thinking about, kind of what direction do we want to take this? Because some of the anecdotes in the book, are a little bit more ribald or, bawdy because of what goes on at Waffle House at 2 a.m. So at the end of the day, we decided we wanted to tone it down and go with sort of a PG, family friendly version. But, James has this wholesomeness and earnestness about him. And he really does. I've met him a couple times. We had lunch in LA earlier this year. And he's just a really down to earth guy. So I think to the extent that he comes off as being, a good guy in the movie, that reflects well on me. But yeah, we got lucky with him for sure.
That's fantastic. Wow. Okay. So we're at 4 minutes to the top of the hour, and I have one more question for you before we close. And that is, why is it bold to be smart about our role and our understanding of money and the cycle that we play within our economy?
Why is it bold?
Yeah.
Oh, think about that for a minute. I guess the thing I realized was that we tend to think of our actions kind of in a vacuum, right? How does each thing we do affect us? And, you know, as human beings, there's sort of that natural sense, right? Of if I undertake any given action, what does this do for me? And the thing I realized is that we don't usually think about the accumulated effects of each of us pursuing our individual agendas, but there are these systemic effects that occur, you know, of each of us pursuing our own interests. And you saw that with the housing crisis, right? Nobody wants to buy a house with no money down and do that with the intent of jeopardizing the financial system. You're doing it because you've got all of this potential upside and the bank's taking all the risk. So you're just thinking about your own effect. And I think the big pause for, I'll call it reflection, that this whole endeavor gave me was thinking about how each of those individual actions sums up into this big effect for the financial system. And it's the same way with anything we do. You know, I did the book and the movie, and I needed it as a catharsis. I never would have thought that, you know, it would mean, you know, having the effects on some other people that it has. So I guess that's my big takeaway, is that there are ripple effects that you can't foresee of these individual financial decisions we make. And so that's something worth contemplating.
Thank you for that. I love that. And I like that you ended with the question of, or the invitation to question ourselves and to think about it. And here on the Voice of Bold Business Radio, we are all about rethinking our thinking on a regular basis. You will find all of the program notes for this program, Smart People Learn Smart Money, sometime today or most likely tonight. And it will be at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P101. That is voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 101. You can also search Smart People Learn Smart Money. You can also search James Adams and BBB Radio as a hashtag. All of those things will get you to the show notes, to the replay of the program, to the places that we are distributing it, which include YouTube, which is where we're live streaming, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and several more. Take a look at the website to subscribe, rate this program, leave a comment, and most importantly, have the next shows automatically delivered to your listening queue. Your experience and your beliefs define what it means to be a leader today. Jimmy and his advice and expertise and experiences are here to help us rethink our thinking, to understand where problems are that we're facing, identify them, and decide what we want to do next and take action on them. It's up to us to pave the way. Remember, you are the smart people who learn smart money.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.